So in a summer that has been huge for action cameras and 360 and a week that was huge for GoPro, I think we need to talk about the fact that, well, it's not what it looks like, not at all. Now, before you torch me in the comments, I promise this isn't clickbait. I do have real information to share and talk about, but a quick disclosure. I am not in any way financially incentivized by GoPro doing poorly or excellent. I'm not incentivized by DJI or Insta360. And up until this point, none of those companies have sent me products. Now, I am a professional photographer, I'm a videographer, I'm a YouTube and content creator, but my background is in business, and I love where business and creation and technology intersect. And above all else, I love making cool stuff. And these are tools that we use to make cool stuff, and they're very important to us. So whether we're working with this gear or we're just enjoying and playing and just having a good time, these are tools that we use as creators to create the things that we do. And I think it's important that when companies come out with new products, we should know how they work, and we should know how they're being made. So what does that mean when it comes to the last week and what GoPro has been doing? So we got the expected and anticipated Max 2, their 360-degree camera, and then we got two new products that were somewhat unexpected. We also learned that one of the products that we'd been anticipating for a while, well, it wasn't coming. And I think honestly, that's the first indication that something odd is going on. But let's start by talking about the Max 2 and what we're getting out of it. And I'll preface this by saying that I have owned quite a few GoPros. I owned the first Max 360 camera. I also have a couple of Insta360s. I have DJI drones, and I'm wearing a DJI microphone right now. So I've definitely owned a number of products from these companies and GoPro specifically, and I really liked my GoPros over the years, but I haven't bought any recently. And that's partly because I haven't had a ton of need, but also because, to be honest, to me, they didn't seem to really do a lot more from iteration to iteration. You can set your calendar by GoPro announcing a new Hero almost every year. But we don't have a GoPro Hero 13 successor this year. We have the GoPro Max 2. According to the information that I'm able to find, is that GoPro is continuing to use their GP2 processor. Now, that's not really the end of the world. The GP2 processor has served them exceptionally well. It's been basically in the last 3 or 4 iterations of the Hero cameras. And it was a big jump when they switched from the GP1 to the GP2. That was an advancement in their technology, but it's been years. And the GP2 processor has, well, it has one fatal flaw, because with software advancements, you can continue to get a lot out of the system on a chip process units. They don't necessarily have to be updated every single year, but this particular processor is built on what we call a process node that is 12 nanometers. And what that means is that the measurement between the gates in the transistors, basically the smallest parts of the processor. Insta360, for example, in their X5, they use a 5 nanometer process. In the AI processing chip that they use is 5 nanometers. But it's not just about the process node, because again, if you're advancing the silicon that you're using and you've got great software to go with it, then that's really all that matters. It's the product, it's the output that matters, and showing that you're advancing your product over time. But that again is where the Max 2 kind of falls short. And I warned against this when we talked about the potential for a Hero Black, the 14th version, which now we're not going to get, at least not this year. And I said, GoPro's gonna do the same thing that they always do. They're gonna warm over the previous chips, both the processor and the sensor. They're gonna push it harder, and they're gonna try to come up with ways to reduce the heat that generates. Because when you take silicon designed to do one thing, and even when you iterate with software, you push it harder, you push more power through it, and you try to get it to more stuff, you're going to end up with more heat unless you change the process node. As a result, they are dealing with trying to offload all that heat. And the fact that we don't have a Hero 14 tells me that they couldn't get it to do anything more than the 13, right? This is a publicly traded company that has been rumored for acquisition, for potential failure. There have been questions about their corporate leadership and where the direction of the company is heading. So trust me, if they had the opportunity to release everything, including a new flagship action camera like a 14, they would have, but they didn't. And that tells me that with the GP2 and the current image sensor that they have, they are not able to do anything more with it. So then how did they make the Max 2 work? Well, they've updated some of the internals. They've added more heat dissipation, which we can see physically on the design. And they've effectively taken two of the guts of a GoPro Hero 11, 12, or 13 and smashed it together. And that in itself does create a new and novel product that we didn't have before. So they have something to release, but they didn't release the single camera actions. Again, tells me that they don't have it, or at least that's what I expected to see out of the Max 2. But GoPro claims that they are completely new sensors. Now, the original Max 1 used a 1/2.3 inch sensor, or 1/2.3 type sensor. So this is smaller than a 1/2 sensor, and there's two of them, and they total out to 18 megapixels. But in the coverage that we've been able to see since the Max 2 has come out, they're not pushing a lot of details about the sensors because while they are, according to GoPro, completely redesigned, they're the same size. They're 1/2.3 inch. And I'm gonna talk in a second about the true 8K claim that GoPro is making, but the overall quality and the general performance, I think, of a sensor or of a camera in general comes from a couple of different things. Sensor size, the resolution, and the processing that goes into it. And when I say sensor size, I also mean kind of how it's built. And a 1/2.3 inch sensor is small, even when there's two of them. Now, by comparison, the X5 uses a 1/2.8 or 1/1.28, and the Osmo 360 uses their 1/1.1 inch type sensor. And again, there's two of those. So when you take the sensor area and you compare it, you end up with 60% more sensor area on the X5 and almost double on the Osmo 360. You also get considerably more resolution on both of those sensors because they're using, at least in the case of the Osmo 360, quad Bayer sensors. So there's more information to be gathered, processed by their new, more updated, more state-of-the-art AI processing engines in their SoCs. But in a lot of cases, you actually can make up for that for a smaller sensor size with improved processing or smaller resolution, which actually increases your pixel pitch, the size of the photodiodes. A larger photodiode does a better job in low light. It does better with noise. And you might actually think that the lower resolution of the GoPro would help it here, but it doesn't because the sensor is so much smaller. If you calculate the actual pixel pitch for the Max 2, you end up with about 1.2. That's the size of each sensor. Now, the Osmo 360 and the Insta360 X5 used binned sensors or quad Bayer bin sensors that are 48 megapixels. They can bin down to 12. And so the usable pixel pitch is 2.4, double the size of those in the GoPro. Because, again, even though those sensors are much higher megapixels, which could potentially hurt you in the low light department, the sensors are considerably larger. So what does that actually mean for GoPro and the Max 2 image quality? Well, it means that you're gonna get lower low light performance, which we've now seen in most of the review coverage. It means that the details aren't gonna be there because of lower resolution. And it means that if you try to push it, not only is it gonna potentially drain the battery faster, but also it is going to overheat or at least get very hot. And you might be saying, as I have to myself, what about the GP3 processor? Well, we haven't seen the GP3 processor yet. It's been announced at an investor call, right? We know that they're working on it, but it's not in any products right now. In fact, if it was, it would probably debut in the 14, which we didn't see, which tells us that for sure that chip is not ready. So is GoPro just lying to everybody? Well, no, at least I don't think so. They legally can't do that. They're a publicly traded company, and honestly, they'd have a shareholder revolt if it was found that the things that they've announced to boost their stock price never came out. But sometimes you gotta give your shareholders what they want and announce new products, even if they're not ready, to avoid the potential for an investor panic. And I think, honestly, that is what GoPro is doing here. Because remember, they didn't just announce a new chip in the works. They also announced that they were going to be releasing or were looking into the potential for a low light performance camera similar to the Sony a7S, and that they were looking at new segments to get back into. I even joked that, well, hey, maybe it's time for GoPro to get back into the drone game. But they did release a new product. They did get into a new segment, but that product looked oddly familiar when I saw it announced. And that's because I've seen it before. I have one, or at least I have a version of it. So it's not uncommon for companies to use what's called white labeling, where a company will develop a product and then they'll sell it under a number of different names. And what we saw GoPro announce this week, this past week, was their gimbal, their mobile gimbal, to compete potentially with companies like DJI and the Mobile 6, the Mobile 7. So the new GoPro gimbal, which is the first time that we've seen a gimbal out of GoPro since the Karma days, where they sold off all of their intellectual property. They don't actually own any of the internal engineering to make a gimbal, at least not that we're aware of. So they've either been developing this secretly or they bought it from somebody else. And that's where Hohem comes in. So Hohem makes a number of gimbals and stabilizer units designed for small cameras and for mobile phones. I've reviewed a few of them here on the channel. They're great products. They're inexpensive, they're lightweight, and they pack a lot of features. Some of the more recent ones included AI tracking. And if you look pretty closely at the Fluid Pro AI, it looks a lot like a Hohem product. And I feel pretty confident to say that if it's not specifically a Hohem gimbal, it's a white label from a company making things very close to what Hohem makes. And there's nothing wrong with that. Again, lots of companies do it. But it's the fall. We didn't get a new GoPro. We got a Max that has an old processor in it, and that on paper at least doesn't seem to stack up against the competition, and a gimbal, a new product category from GoPro that we haven't seen in years, that's very likely a white label product. And then that brings us to the third announcement this week, the third product that GoPro is releasing. So the GoPro Hero Lite, it's lit. This is a replacement for the Hero 4K or the Hero model, which is their kind of entry-level, smaller model. And it adds two really kind of key things. Number one, it adds a light, which is kind of implied in the name, which is cool. If you're looking for something small, maybe like a vlogging camera, and you don't want to bring lights around, or maybe you don't know where you're going to be and you want a little bit of extra fill, this will do that for you. And secondly, it improves the 4K recording capability from 4K 30 in the original version up to 4K 60. So those are primarily the improvements of the Hero model. They're small, they're iterative, the light is interesting, it doesn't require you to have something like the media mod on one of the larger GoPros, and overall this is a evolutionary next step in this particular product, and I can't knock them for it. It's inexpensive, it's $279, and I think it'll compete well in the small action camera space when you look at it compared to the Insta360 Ultra or the just released DJI Nano. It's not quite as small or lightweight as those cameras, but it compares considerably better on price, and I think that's going to be a factor coming into the holiday season here in 2025. But that's not the only highlight of this release. There are a few positives. This isn't all just bashing on GoPro. There are some things that they did right. Test 1, 2, test 1, 2. And specifically, if we talk about the 8K camera, if we talk about the 360 camera, they did improve a couple of things over their competitors. Even though it has the smaller sensors, that smaller optical package allowed them to do two things. They were able to shrink the actual size of the camera down just a bit, and they're able to offer fully replaceable lenses. These aren't lens guards that you can replace. This is the actual lens to the sensor system. And not only is it replaceable, but it's replaceable without tools. It just clips on and off, as opposed to the Insta360 system that is replaceable but requires a little bit more finesse, and the Osmo 360 that doesn't have a replacement option at all. And as someone who has destroyed quite a few GoPros in my time, I can tell you that that is absolutely something that you have to have. And one thing that honestly I think is somewhat of a non-starter in some cases with the Osmo 360. So GoPro has definitely done something right with that part of this release. The other thing that they've done, and I don't know if this is a pro or a con as it comes to GoPro's release of the 360 camera, but they've identified the fact that these 8K cameras aren't really 8K cameras. Let's try that again. And they claim that they're able to get full, true 8K resolution out of their combined sensors. Whereas Osmo 360 and Insta360 don't exactly do 8K, even though the Osmo 360 does have a square sensor and a large portion of that sensor is utilized, the full resolution of the stitched image in terms of what's usable is not really 8K. But even with GoPro's marketing, there's some questions, because traditionally when you talk about an 8K image, you're going to be outputting that to either a vertical or a horizontal format. And so 7680 in terms of vertical pixels is traditionally what you would consider 8K. Shooting on this camera right here, if I was shooting in the 8K mode, I would be getting 7680 wide pixels. And the X5 and the Osmo 360, they do that. But the claim from GoPro is that they do that by overlapping and that they don't actually get that full resolution out of their two sensors. And the GoPro Max 2 also outputs a 7680 vertical 16:9 or 2:1 image, but they claim that they're not using the overlapping or dropped pixels. They're not using any sort of upscaling or sharpening in that particular measurement, and that the other guys are. And as a result, their 8K is true 8K because it actually uses all of those pixels in the resulting image. So you're gonna have to do a lot of your own pixel peeping to really determine whether or not that claim is true. The images look quite sharp and great in perfectly lit condition, but where we've started to see reviewers claim that there have been issues specifically in low light situations. And we're gonna have to see, once this camera gets in the hands of a lot of people, whether or not overheating or battery depletion becomes a problem. One other thing that GoPro's included in the feature set here is using their Beta Labs feature, the ability to actually crank up the bit rate to up to 300 megabits per second. That's 2 to 3 times the competitors. And I've always said that I appreciate any company that gives creators the tools that they need to make the decisions for themselves. We don't need you to decide what compression format or codec we want to use. Give us everything that the chip can do and let us decide how much space we need on our SD cards, how much processing power we need in our computers, and how quickly we want to get that footage outdoor. I think we can make those choices, and I very much appreciate that GoPro is giving us the power to do that. But you are definitely going to fill up your cards in like no time, and you're going to burn through your battery immediately with that kind of mode. Now, another thing that GoPro definitely got right with this camera, and that I hope to see in all of their cameras, and really all cameras going forward, is that they offer a 10-bit log mode. And that might sound crazy as something that isn't available, but the Insta360 currently does not offer a 10-bit mode. You can shoot in log and you can shoot in HDR, but the output is 8-bit, which means that the color is baked in. And a log profile with an 8-bit video stream is honestly kind of worthless. And as someone who relies on shooting in complicated environments where I need the ability to manipulate the scene with as much dynamic range as possible, having 10-bit functionality and the ability to shoot in a good quality log curve is very, very important. And I think that GoPro has done a very good job here. And maybe that's where we can see why those decisions were made. They kept the existing processor because the new one isn't ready yet, and they didn't want to push it out the door too fast. They kept the existing resolution and sensor size while revamping the sensors themselves because they knew that they wanted to offer this high bit rate 10-bit option with log, and that they just wouldn't be able to do it with larger sensors, and that they felt that without upscaling and adding a whole bunch of junk along the way, they could potentially offer a better product than the competitors. I want to believe that. I want to feel that that is the case here with GoPro, but unfortunately, I just don't know. And I fear that these are the last gasp of a company that is trying desperately to remain relevant while leveraging their existing IP with the last bits, the last ounces, the last drops of blood that they can bleed from these stones in order to get a product out the door in hopes that the next thing, maybe a new image sensor, maybe a new processor, maybe a new product category like a low light unit, will give them enough push to get them through the next few years so that they can continue down the path, down the product roadmap that maybe they have in mind. I hope that that's true. I hope that that's the case, but I'm pessimistic about it at the moment, to be quite honest. And as someone who really likes GoPro products, I can't say that at the moment this would be the product that I would buy. I don't know that I would buy the other ones too, because to be quite honest, they have all of their own hangups, and part of me just says wait. And I don't want to get into a recommendation in this video because there may be some instances where you're deep in the GoPro ecosystem and you love their products and their software especially, But we've also seen issues with the software where subscriptions were necessary for basic things. Those are things that you see from a company that is desperately trying to get their books in order. And when you combine that with the CEO making the statements that they did in their last public announcements about the products on the way, it tells me that they are either trying to run out the clock, just get a little bit more track in front of them. I don't know. Let me know what you think down in the comments. Let me know what you think about this product release. Am I crazy? Am I dumb? Especially if you got info that is new and maybe you want to share it with me. Obviously, as I'm making this video, I'm using all the information that I have available, combined with intuition, which I think is half the game here. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.